If the Soviet Union demanded access to the prize fleet, the United States Navy had a simple solution. Put the evidence on the bottom of the ocean where political rivals could not reach it. This decision boundary, not enemy action, determined the final resting place of the Imperial Japanese Navy submarine I-401. She did not sink in combat or by accident. She was deliberately sunk to keep her technology out of rival hands. She was erased from the surface inventory to secure a strategic monopoly on her technology. The I-401 was an engineering anomaly that defied the standard logic of 1940s naval architecture. She was the second ship of the I-400 class, a design that remained the largest submarine type ever built until the nuclear ballistic missile boats of the 1960s. Her specifications broke the scale of conventional underwater warfare. She measured 400 feet in length and displaced 6,560 tons while submerged. For comparison, the standard American fleet submarine of the era displaced less than half that amount. This was not just a submarine, it was a submersible aircraft carrier designed to launch 3 floatplanes from a watertight hangar on the foredeck. The sheer physical scale of the vessel created operational confusion even for her own side. On July 23, 1945, I-401 was on the surface in Tsugaru Strait when Imperial Japanese Army coastal batteries at Cape Shiokubi mistook her for an Allied submarine and opened fire. The shore gunners did not recognize the silhouette because no Japanese submarine was supposed to be that large. They assumed she was an American invader and engaged her until the identification error was corrected. This incident highlights the monstrous proportions of the hull. She was a high-value asset that looked like nothing else in the water. When the war ended in August 1945, the I-401 was surrendered to the United States Navy. She was studied intensively, but the window for analysis was closing. By the spring of 1946, tensions with the Soviet Union were escalating. The Soviets cited treaty agreements to demand inspection of the captured Japanese tonnage. The United States Navy had no intention of sharing the design secrets of the underwater aircraft carrier. The order was given to execute Operation Road's End. On May 31, 1946, the submarine was towed out of Pearl Harbor to the waters off Barbers Point. The disposal method chosen was technically distinct from standard scuttling. In a standard scuttling evolution, the crew opened sea valves and vents to allow water to flood the pressure hull passively. The ship sinks because she loses buoyancy control. For the I-401, the Navy chose a more violent termination. They utilized the hull as a live fire target to test the effectiveness of the Mark 18 electric torpedo. This distinction matters for the condition of the wreck. A submarine that sinks via open valves settles on the bottom relatively intact, subject only to the crushing pressure of the depth. A submarine struck by torpedoes suffers catastrophic structural trauma before she even leaves the surface. The load paths are severed, and the watertight integrity is shattered by high explosive force. The I-401 did not glide to the bottom. She was broken open and driven down. The target ship, USS Cabezon, fired 2 torpedoes. The impact sent the massive submarine to the seabed, 2,690 feet below the surface. At this depth, the ocean is a cold, high-pressure environment that preserves steel but crushes weak compartments. The wreck remained dark and unvisited for nearly 60 years. The location was known generally, but the specific coordinates were lost to the archives. The giant had vanished into the mud, leaving behind only the question of how much of her unique geometry survived the violence of her execution. 2,690 feet. That is the depth where the water column exerts over 1,200 pounds of pressure on every square inch of submerged steel. At this depth, the ocean is not merely an environment, it is a crushing mechanical force that seeks to equalize any pressure differential. The survival of a submarine hull depends on its ability to resist this weight, but on May 31, 1946, the I-401 was denied that structural defense. The United States submarine USS Cabezon lined up the target and fired 2 Mark 18 electric torpedoes. The solution was accurate. 2 Mark 18 electric torpedoes struck, and the submarine sank by the stern. The physics of the sinking were dictated by the location of these breaches. When the stern torpedo detonated, it compromised the pressure hull and the ballast tanks in the aft section. Water rushed in at high velocity, destroying the delicate buoyancy trim that keeps a submarine level. The heavy stern dropped, dragging the vessel down while the bow reared up out of the water. The submarine slid backward beneath the surface, beginning a terminal acceleration toward the bottom. This descent triggered the phenomenon known as catastrophic implosion. This is the concept we must understand to read the wreck today. A surface ship that sinks is usually open to the sea, allowing water to fill the spaces gradually as it goes down. A submarine is a hardened pressure vessel designed to keep air in and water out. If a compartment remains watertight as the boat sinks past its crush depth, the hull plating can no longer withstand the external force. The steel does not leak, it buckles instantaneously. The air inside is compressed until it triggers a violent collapse, often indistinguishable from an explosion. Because the I-401 was breached by torpedoes, some sections flooded immediately and equalized. But any sealed compartment that survived the initial hit would have been at risk of this structural failure during the fall. The damage was strictly structural, however, because the vessel was effectively a hollow shell. This brings us to a specific operational detail regarding her final days of active service. When the Japanese surrender was announced in August 1945, the I-401 was at sea under the command of Lieutenant Commander Nambu. He anticipated that the ship would be seized. To prevent the technology and weaponry from falling into American hands fully intact, he ordered a disciplined disposal protocol. The crew catapulted all 3 Aichi floatplanes into the sea without pilots. They then fired all remaining torpedoes to empty the tubes. This action was not an act of panic, but a calculated procedure to render the ship inert. Consequently, when the Cabezon sank her months later, there were no internal warheads or aviation fuel stores to trigger a secondary detonation. The violence that tore the ship apart was purely kinetic and hydrostatic, not chemical. The vessel that now rested in the dark was a broken version of a high-performance machine. On the surface, the I-401 was capable of 18.7 knots, a respectable speed for such a massive displacement. She was built for range and payload, not for agility. Now that 18-knot hull form was buried in the sediment, obscured by the eternal darkness of the deep Pacific. The wreckage lay silent, hidden from the world for decades. The physics of the crash had done the work of dismantling the ship, leaving a debris field that would wait nearly 60 years for the first light of a survey vehicle. 18 years. That is the operational gap between the first confirmed sighting of the wreck and the high-definition forensic audit that followed. In the world of deep-sea survey, data points are often separated by decades due to the extreme cost and technical difficulty of accessing the abyss. The I-401 was not lost in a shallow grave. She was concealed by nearly half a mile of water, a depth that restricts access to only the most capable specialized assets. The first breakthrough occurred on March 17, 2005. The Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory, known as HURL, conducted a series of dives using the manned submersibles Pisces 4 and Pisces 5. Their sonar systems identified a large anomaly on the seabed off Barber's Point. When the pilots brought their craft into visual range, they did not find a generic debris field. They found a massive hull structure that matched the architectural profile of the Sentoku-type. The identification was confirmed by a specific, fragile piece of evidence that defies the logic of corrosion. On the side of the conning tower, the alphanumeric designation I-401 was still clearly visible. This is a significant anomaly. In most shipwreck scenarios, paint is the first material to degrade, stripped away by microorganisms and current abrasion, leaving only bare, rusting steel. On this wreck, the painted identifier has survived more than 75 years of immersion. It remains legible today, providing a positive lock on the vessel's identity without the need for artifact recovery. While the HURL dives established the location, the technology of underwater survey evolved rapidly in the interim. In 2023, the Ocean Exploration Trust returned to the site with the exploration vessel Nautilus. This mission utilized a fundamentally different approach known as remotely operated vehicle telepresence. This is the concept that now dominates deep water archaeology. In the 2005 dives, human pilots were physically present inside the pressure sphere of the submersible, limiting their bottom time to the endurance of their life support and battery systems. The Nautilus mission removed the human element from the water. They deployed a tethered robot, the ROV Atalanta, which is controlled by pilots on the surface ship through a fiber optic umbilical. This cable transmits power down to the robot and sends high-bandwidth digital video up to the control room in real time. Telepresence changes the nature of the investigation. The ROV does not get tired. It can hover over a specific section of the hull for hours, illuminating the wreckage with high-intensity lighting arrays that reveal details invisible to the human eye in a viewport. The Nautilus survey mapped the I-401 with modern photogrammetry techniques, creating a digital baseline of the wreck's condition. The comparison between the 2005 and 2023 datasets reveals a stable site. The wreck is not collapsing rapidly. The low oxygen levels at this depth have slowed the oxidation process, preserving the steel plating. However, the clarity of the new imagery also confirmed the severity of the structural breaks. The surveys prove that the submarine is not resting in one piece. The hull is sheared apart, a testament to the forces unleashed in 1946. While the painted number on the tower survived, the structural spine of the ship did not. When a structure 400 feet long impacts the seabed, it rarely arrives as a single coherent unit. The physics of the impact usually overcome the tensile strength of the keel. The survey data confirms that the I-401 followed this pattern of disintegration. She did not settle flat, she broke apart. The wreckage is distributed in 3 distinct sections: the main hull, the severed bow, and a debris field comprised largely of the shattered aircraft hangar. The geometry of the main hull dominates the site. This section extends from the severed stern forward to the area of the conning tower. It sits upright on the bottom, a testament to the stability of the wide double-hull design. However, the bow section tells a different story. It lies separated from the rest of the ship, broken off just forward of the hangar bulkhead. This separation suggests that as the submarine struck the bottom, the structural momentum snapped the forward section clean off the fuselage. To understand the visual condition of these pieces, we must apply the concept of galvanic corrosion and material degradation. A shipwreck is an electrochemical battery. When dissimilar materials like steel, aluminum, and brass are submerged in salt water, they corrode at different rates. Furthermore, organic materials like teak decking are consumed by biological organisms. On the I-401, this process has stripped away the skin to reveal the skeleton. The wooden deck planks that once covered the upper surface have rotted away entirely. This exposes the intricate network of steel piping, valves, and ready-use lockers that were originally concealed beneath the walkway. We are looking at the industrial anatomy of the submarine, laid bare not by the explosion, but by the slow chemistry of the ocean. This degradation provides a clear view of the conning tower, which presents one of the most specific forensic details on the site. The periscope shears are intact, but the periscope housing itself is bent at a sharp angle. This deformation is not the result of a direct hit from a torpedo. It is a signature of fluid dynamics. As the submarine accelerated downward stern first, the water rushed past the hull at a speed far exceeding the design limits of the vertical appendages. The drag force on the periscope became so great that the steel tube buckled under the load. It is a frozen record of the velocity of the descent. The hangar itself, the defining feature of the class, has suffered the worst. While it was built to withstand the pressure of diving, the structural trauma of the sinking and the subsequent impact caused it to collapse and separate. It lies as a field of twisted metal, barely recognizable as the cavernous tube that once housed 3 bombers. The damage here is chaotic, a mix of impact force and long-term deterioration. However, the damage at the stern is different. It is not random. It is concentrated and specific, pointing directly back to the catalyst event of 1946. The primary objective of a forensic survey is to distinguish between the cause of the sinking and the consequences of the sinking. When a submarine lies broken on the seabed, the damage is a composite of high explosive impact, hydrostatic crushing, and seabed collision. To read the wreck of the I-401, we must separate these forces using the principles of torpedo impact forensics. The distinction is visible in the steel. A pressure hull that fails due to depth, known as an implosion, tends to crumple inward. The ribs and plating buckle under the uniform squeeze of the ocean, looking like a crushed soda can. A torpedo detonation creates a different signature. It delivers a localized, high-velocity shockwave that shreds the metal, forcing it outward or shearing it cleanly at the weld seams. The survey of the stern section provides the physical evidence required to validate the historical record. The imagery reveals catastrophic damage to the aft hull. The steel is torn and fragmented in a pattern consistent with a contact detonation. This validates the log of the USS Cabezon. The Mark 18 electric torpedo, fired in 1946, did not merely breach the tank. It structurally severed the stern buoyancy, initiating the loss of trim that dragged the vessel under. We are not looking at a random failure. We are looking at the specific entry wound of the weapon that killed the ship. Moving forward along the deck, we encounter the vessel's primary surface armament, which offers a different kind of forensic clue. The I-401 is equipped with a single 14-centimeter or 5.5-inch deck gun mounted aft of the hangar. This is a rare caliber in naval history, specific to Japanese cruiser submarines. On most scuttled wrecks, the guns are secured in the fore and aft position, locked down for the final tow. On this wreck, the gun is trained out to the starboard side. This anomaly requires a mechanical explanation. It is highly unlikely that the gun was manned or trained for combat during a disposal operation. There was no target. The crew had already surrendered and departed. The most probable explanation is gravity. As the torpedo struck the stern and the buoyancy failed, the submarine likely listed or rolled sharply to starboard during the initial phase of the sinking. The locking mechanism on the train gear may have failed or been left disengaged, allowing the massive weight of the barrel to swing freely to the low side. It is a gravity trace, a frozen record of the angle of the ship as she began her final descent. The condition of this gun and the specificity of the stern damage allow us to reach a conclusion without the need for physical recovery. The United States Navy has no operational reason to raise the I-401. The cost would be prohibitive, and the technical risk of lifting a compromised hull from 2,600 feet is extreme. Furthermore, the survey has achieved the primary mission. We have positively identified the hull through the conning tower markings. We have verified the cause of loss through the torpedo damage at the stern. We have documented the unique architecture of the hangar and the armament. The historical record stated that the I-401 was destroyed by American torpedoes. The seabed evidence confirms this account with high confidence. The investigation is a success. We have locked the identity and the cause of death. However, as we conclude the inspection of the bow section, one final detail emerges that the torpedo logs do not explain. It is a small feature, easily overlooked in the darkness, but it suggests that the interior of the ship was not entirely sealed when she went down. We have confirmed the identity of the hull. We have mapped the distribution of the wreckage. We have determined the mechanics of the structural failure. The survey of the I-401 is a technical success because it answers the questions that history left open. We do not need to recover the steel to validate the engineering. The data collected by the remote sensors provides a digital preservation of the vessel that is far more stable than the corroding metal itself. Yet, even in a complete survey, there are variables that remain undefined. On the forward deck of the bow section, the camera systems recorded a specific anomaly. A watertight hatch stands wide open. This configuration is inconsistent with a standard cruising condition where all access points are dogged down to maintain the pressure boundary. There are two competing engineering theories to explain this. The first theory suggests this was a deliberate configuration for the scuttling. The American prize crew may have unsealed the hatch to accelerate the flooding process once the torpedoes struck, ensuring the vessel would not linger on the surface as a navigational hazard. The second theory views it as a consequence of the sinking dynamics. As the submarine sank stern first, air pockets trapped in the forward compartments would have been compressed rapidly. If the internal pressure exceeded the latch strength, the hatch could have been blown open by the expanding gas before the bow struck the bottom. Because the records of the disposal team are incomplete regarding this specific detail, the open hatch remains a bounded unknown. It is a permanent question mark on the deck of the sunken giant. This detail sits atop the defining feature of the I-400 class, the aircraft hangar. This cylindrical structure was the reason the ship was built. It was designed to house 3 Aichi M6A1 Siren floatplanes, high-performance bombers capable of striking the Panama Canal. The survey shows the hangar tube is collapsed and broken, a victim of the structural trauma. However, the defensive systems that protected this payload are still visible. The wreck site contains the remains of the 25mm anti-aircraft guns. These triple-mount weapons were the standard close-in defense for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Their presence on the deck reminds us that this was not a passive transport, but a capital ship designed to operate on the surface in hostile waters. The condition of these artifacts is dictated by the environment. This brings us to the final concept of sediment preservation. At 2,690 feet, the seabed is a low-energy environment. There is very little current to scour the wreck or move the debris. Instead, the site is slowly being covered by marine snow, a continuous dusting of organic particulate matter falling from the surface. Over decades, this sediment acts as a preservative blanket. It creates a low-oxygen microenvironment at the surface of the steel, which slows the rate of oxidation. This explains why the I-401 appears remarkably intact compared to shallow water wrecks. She is not being torn apart by storm surge or tidal action. She is being fossilized. The physics of the deep ocean have paused the clock on her deterioration. The paint remains, the guns remain, the open hatch remains. The I-401 was once a strategic secret, hidden from the world to protect a technological advantage. Today, she is hidden by the depth, protected by the difficulty of access. The survey is complete. The coordinates are logged and the condition is assessed. There is no operational need to disturb the site further. We leave the submarine exactly where the physics of 1946 placed her, in the cold, high-pressure dark of the Pacific.